Welcome, independent researchers, skeptics, and all of humankind, to Shadow-Citizen. Shadow-Citizen will explore the shadows of an alternate reality. Your hosts, Rachel L. McIntosh and Rob O'Sell.
All right. I am so excited about tonight's show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Shadow-Citizen. Tonight, our guest is somebody that I am fascinated with what he is studying. He's an independent researcher. But before I introduce him, because he's amazing, he even agreed to be on our show with us, my co-host is Rob O'Sell. And Rob, are you here with us right now?
Yes, hello, Rachel.
Oh, great.
This is our second show on American Freedom Radio, so that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It sure is.
Because now you put up a list of all the affiliate FMs that it's going out over also, so that, we don't even know how many people are listening to us now, but it's really very cool, and we're trying to hold on to our old friends so you can still listen. We're simulcast over at Mixler.com/word Radio Confluence, and there will be chatters over there. So if you want to ask questions, you can put them in chat, and we'll try to get to them. I monitor that room, and then also from RadioConfluence.com, you can take us with you on TuneIn and Zeno Live. And then we still have our regular website, Shadow-Citizen.online, where we've got cool merchandise. We've got a fan page. We've got all the upcoming guests and past archives. So, Rachel, that site is really looking good. So
yeah, it's looking pro at this point, isn't it? We got all the fan page. People are sending their pictures of themselves, and we have fans wearing our T-shirts. Our logo is cool. I don't know if you people that are looking at this from American Freedom Radio have seen our logo. Our logo is amazing, and it's on T-shirts, it's on coffee cups, it's on basically anything you could put it on. And fans are taking pictures of themselves and sending them, and we've got it posted on our website, and that's pretty cool.
Yep.
The other thing that's really neat at our website are the archives. And we recently, well, not recently, but one of our first episodes we ever did for Shadow-Citizen Online was Sean Stone, the son of film director Oliver. Is it Oliver Stone? Oliver Stone. And he's, of course, did that movie JFK. And JFK is the thing that got me sort of awoken to the whole, I didn't even realize there was a conspiracy around the JFK shooting. And so this kind of ties us into our previous episodes of Shadow-Citizen. But tonight we have with us Rob Clark, who is a JFK assassination researcher. He has a special interest in witness testimony and historical documents. And he's been interested in looking for the truth of what happened on November 22nd, 1963. And he's particularly interested in the movements of Lee Harvey Oswald in the months leading up to the murder in the Dealey Plaza. He's been doing this for 25 years, this guy, Rob Clark. And he is also hosts a podcast called The Lone Gunman. And he's done that for the past 3 years. And you can hear that podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and TuneIn Radio and the host site Spreaker.com. And Rob Clark, I'm going to keep calling you Rob Clark so I don't mess you up with Rob O'Sell. But thank you for being with us today, Rob.
Well, thank you for having me, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Oh, great. Hey, now I wanted to ask you, when I saw your picture at our website and I saw that you had been doing this for 25 years, first off, were you like 5 when you decided to start researching this? You look so young. What made you, what like grabbed you about this whole event to make research?
Yeah, I was actually in high school.
Okay.
And I was tasked, our whole class had to do papers on various presidents. And I just, by luck of the draw, got John Kennedy. Mm-hmm. So, back in those days, back in the 80s, we didn't have the internet. We had to do, encyclopedias and actually books and go to the library and things of that nature when you actually wanted to write a paper. And, I just started reading about it and came across a Jim Garrison book called On the Trail of the Assassins. And I read that, and it opened my eyes to a whole vast array of possibilities. And I've been hooked ever since then. And like most people, when the movie JFK came out, it kind of reignited my interest back, in the early 90s. And it's been full bore since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that movie does grab you for sure. What was the part in the movie that you thought was the most gripping?
I really enjoyed the movie as a whole, for entertainment purposes. When you really start tearing the movie apart for historical accuracy, it kind of wanes a bit in places. Mm-hmm. Of course, it takes artistic liberties and things of this nature for Hollywood purposes. But I thought all in all, the entire movie was essential in reigniting interest in the assassination, and it also paved the way for the JFK Records Act, which we're going to reap the benefits of later this year in October when the CIA has to release the rest of the JFK files.
Can I ask a question? Why? Because I'm kind of young. I'm youngish, not really though. I just say that to make me feel better. But why did they seal those records in the first place? They just thought that the people couldn't handle it. Why did they do that?
Well, it's just most of them are the CIA documents from the FBI that just were never released to the public. Even through FOIA requests, they were deemed, a lot of them deemed, national security purposes. They wouldn't release them, or they're top secret, or they're classified, or things of this nature. And so what they did was they formed a committee to sit down and go through a lot of these files and kind of reassess them. And they have released a lot of them, especially back in the 90s. The Assassination Records and Review Board was formed and tasked with going through a lot of these files and kind of not really reinvestigating things. That really wasn't their purpose, but they did re-interview some witnesses, some of the doctors at Parkland. A lot of it was medical stuff. And they kind of deemed what could go ahead and be released. Some stuff has come out in the 90s and since then, but the CIA is still holding on to, thousands of files, and they are supposed to release them. I mean, they could have released them anytime, but they have to release them by October 2017, according to the JFK Records Act.
I see. So it was mostly because of the CIA. They want to just keep something under wraps for as long as possible till the deadline.
Yeah. It's kind of a conspiracy theory, of course, that the CIA was behind the assassination. I'm sure you've all heard of that. They broached upon it in the movie JFK, and several authors have written about, various figures in the CIA being associated with the assassination, or maybe even taking part in it or planning it. But the CIA was up to a lot of no good back in that time, in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s.
As opposed to
yeah.
Now. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, they were really doing some shady stuff back then, things that they didn't want the public to know about, as far as overthrowing governments and things of this nature.
With elections and whatnot. Sure.
Yeah. Assassinating other foreign leaders.
Sure.
Or attempting to, and that was part of the problem. And
when we talk about the movie, I just watched it here yesterday, and they were saying that that those records would not be released until 2037. So apparently it got bumped up further, and then
those are the Warren Commission files.
Oh, okay, so that's something
they were talking about. Yeah, they were classified for 75 years. From 1960, was it 63, I guess, or 64? That's the Warren Commission files.
Okay, so that's different than the CIA files, and those will be released. Now, and Oliver Stone kind of made I think he said that they sued to get the Zapruder film released, and so were they the first ones to actually show it to the public, or is
no,
that...
It was first shown to the public back in 1974 or 75, I believe, on the Geraldo Rivera show.
Okay.
And actually, one of the earlier researchers, a guy by the name of Robert Groden, who still sits up his little stand in Dealey Plaza to this day on the weekends and sells his books and things like that. He's a fascinating character as well. He's been sued by the city like 80 times, arrested by the city like 80 times. Yeah.
But he's not giving up. God bless America. Good for him.
Yeah, no, it was Robert Groden, Dick Gregory, and they had it on the Geraldo Rivera show, and it was shown to the public for the first time, in the early 70s. And that is really the genesis. Once people saw that for the first time, that was pretty much the genesis for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the HSCA investigation that took place in the late 70s.
Well, it also, people that saw the film realized that Dan Rather was supposed to have seen it earlier, and he describes what he sees, and what he describes is quite a bit different from what the film shows. So,
yeah, just a little bit.
Anyway, and I've got a few clips from that film, and so we're talking about whether the CIA had any involvement. So here's Donald Sutherland as Fletcher Prouty, I believe, in the movie, and this is very short. But
why was Kennedy killed? Who benefited? Who has the power to cover it up? Who?
Mm-hmm. Is that the clip you want to play there? That's it? All right.
Oh, did it come through? Did the clip come through?
It was pretty short. That was pretty short.
It was, but it's, why was Kennedy killed? Who benefited, and who had the power to cover it up? I mean, that's pretty epic questions right there, in my mind, anyway.
So, Rob Clark, do you have any ideas about that? Like, what was the motive, and who has the ability to cover it up?
Well, it's an interesting story. When you look at who was officially tasked to investigate the murder, it was the FBI, and they took over control from the Dallas police relatively quickly. It was pretty much as soon as Lee Harvey Oswald was murdered, they kind of stepped in and started doing their investigation. They were the investigative body for the Warren Commission that Lyndon Johnson assembled, not too long after this happened, to make an official inquiry into the murder. For people out there who know what kind of person J. Edgar Hoover was, even to this day, the FBI doesn't like to be embarrassed, but even back then, that they were famous for always getting their man, and never being wrong about anything, and just being the best of the best, especially when Hoover was alive. Because the CIA is not really supposed to operate inside the borders of the United States. They're more of a foreign intelligence kind of apparatus. But of course we know how that goes, sometimes. But, I forget where I was going with this. The CIA?
Yep.
Yeah, who has the power to cover it up? Who benefited?
Right.
And that's like in that Douglas book of The Unspeakable, I think is the name of it. But he kind of comes to the end of it with the conclusion is it wasn't who wanted Kennedy dead, it's who didn't. Because he had pissed off so many people, from the mob to, the big iron to big oil to people who thought he was a commie and were mad that he didn't send in air support for the Bay of Pigs, and just a whole line of people. And then, of course, the CIA, he threatened to break up into 1,000 pieces and scatter to the wind.
Yeah. And who ends up on the Warren Commission? Allen Dulles, former head of the CIA. So
the one that JFK fired, yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of ironic, and I think part of the problem, Rob, was that the guy, Lee Harvey Oswald, the suspect in this case, he defected to Russia, in the late 50s. He ended up marrying a woman in Russia, having a child over there, and then coming back to the United States with a Russian wife. And, normally when people come back like that are defectors that have been, in our military, because pretty much he got an early release, from the Marine Corps, and within a couple of days he was headed that way, which is kind of suspect, of course. And the CIA did have some of these false defector programs in place, but so far we don't have any conclusive proof in the documents that we have now that Lee Harvey Oswald was any part of that. People suspect it; it's a possibility, but we have no proof.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why did he? What was his motive for going to Russia? Obviously, he was defecting. He had been in our military. He just got fed up, and he said, "I can't do this, and I'm going to Russia." And does anybody know why he decided to go there?
Well, apparently he was fascinated with the whole communist ideal of living. There's reports of people that were in the Marine Corps with him who said he used to listen to, Russian albums, read Russian books, things of this nature. And we have no reports or no documents on how Lee Harvey Oswald learned how to speak Russian. And the idea is that, the conclusion they came up with was that he must have taught himself, which is an amazing feat. Okay. For somebody to teach themselves Russian. Yeah. Now there's, of course, a conspiracy theory that, he went to the Monterey School of Languages while in the Marine Corps and he was taught this. But again, we have no proof of that either. So basically where I was going with this is, okay, you have this guy. It's kind of sketchy what he's doing. Okay. So he comes back to the United States. Ideally the CIA would have debriefed this guy because, hey, he was behind the Iron Curtain. This is the height of the communist Red Scare. Okay. The early 60s. They would have definitely grabbed this guy as soon as he got off the airplane or boat or wherever he came back on and stuck him in a room and said, okay, tell us everything you saw, tell us everything you know. They would have wanted to vet his wife and question her, but apparently none of this happened. At least there's no official record of it happening. He should have been on the FBI's radar, as a guy to watch, according to his background and what he was up to, especially that summer before the assassination there in New Orleans. They should have been watching this guy.
What was he doing in New Orleans?
Well, he was handing out leaflets to Navy guys getting off the boat down there. Fair Play for Cuba committee, supporting Castro. Mm-hmm. Which kind of, he identified himself as a Marxist, not a communist, which, there's a slight difference there, but not too much. Mm-hmm. And, back then, Castro was not really liked for, how he took the country over. He was initially liked for overthrowing Batista, but then things kind of started spiraling out of hand when he started buddying up with the Russians and adopting communism and things of this nature. It led a lot of Cubans to leave Cuba and come over here. And we call those people anti-Castro Cubans. And there was a lot of them, down along the southern coast down there. But, the FBI should have been watching this guy. They should have been watching his mail. He mail ordered a gun, supposedly 2 guns. They should have been watching this guy. He should have been on the radar. He was arrested in New Orleans, for getting in a fist fight with a guy by the name of Carlos Brunier. And he sat in jail. He asked to speak to somebody from the FBI. Actually, they came and talked to him. He supposedly visited Mexico City that fall before the assassination. The CIA should have been on this.
Excuse me. So the guy who's been off the radar, completely off the radar, he just goes to jail and says, I want to talk to the FBI, and they just come in like it's cool, like no big whoop?
Yeah, pretty much.
Can I do that? If I go to jail, can I say, excuse me, I want to talk to the FBI? Will they just come in? I don't know. Is that how it works?
I don't know. There's all kinds of theories out there as to why they would have agreed to come to the jail and speak to this guy, but they did for hours. And nobody knows what exactly was said. which leads you to speculate that, hey, maybe this guy was doing some kind of COINTELPRO operation. Kind of, if he's handing out flyers and, saying, hey, we're going to be having a meeting here, well, then whoever contacts him or shows up at this place, you might want to put their name on a list, as people to watch out for. Which, as we know now, there's a guy by the name of Guy Bannister, who famously opened the movie JFK by beating his friend Jack Martin for getting in his files and questioning him about the assassination. And he was doing things. He was former FBI, and he was doing things like running these little COINTEL programs. He very anti-communist guy, and we know now that he was up to doing that. And Oswald was seen in his offices.
Just as a kind of a curious aside, is he at all related to Joe Bannister, the guy that's out here now with that was on the Freedom to Fascism, or do you know who I'm talking about?
I do, and I don't think he is.
Okay.
I'm not even sure. I don't even think he had children. Guy Bannister's an interesting guy. He's actually one of the very first. When he was with the FBI, he was one of the very first X-Files investigators. He was the guy they sent out. Yeah, he was the guy they sent out when they had unidentified flying objects to investigate.
All right, can I say something?
Sure.
I just watched a movie, not last night, the night before, called Unacknowledged, and it's about disclosure of UFO phenomena. And it was interesting, because of UFO stuff. And the guy is talking about how JFK went to go look at the different UFO things that our government was creating based off of the stuff that they had scooped up from different vessels they had seen. And one time he was with Marilyn Monroe. He brought Marilyn Monroe with him, and she announced that, of course, she was having an affair with JFK and having an affair with his brother. And she announced that she was going to have a press conference about what she saw when she went with JFK to that hangar. And it was like the next day or the 2 days later, she was dead.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple connections with UFOs when it comes to the Kennedy assassination. There's a guy by the name of Fred Lee Chrisman. Mm-hmm. And he was actually attached to the Maury Island sightings in 1947, just prior to Roswell. And he pops into the narrative of the Kennedy assassination during the Jim Garrison investigation. Garrison thought he was one of the three tramps, and he deposed him, and he was part of the Clay Shaw trial. Interviewed, and I was actually found a guy, and I got a very rare book that this guy had self-published back in the early 2000s, and he wasn't talked to for the Warren Commission. But he was for the HSCA, and he was given immunity for his testimony. And he says some very, very eye-opening things. His name was David Beckham, and he was a con man. He knew Fred Lee Chrisman. He was kind of like his handler. And he was talking about when Oswald was handing out flyers down in New Orleans. He knew Lee Harvey Oswald. He actually went to get lunch with Lee Harvey Oswald after one of his leafleting stints, and I believe he's captured in a photo in front of the Trade Mart down there in New Orleans while Oswald's handing out these flyers. And he's got some very interesting things to say. And there's a good book. It's called JFK and UFO by Ken Thomas that goes over a lot of it. If people out there would like to read more about it.
Yeah, because that movie that I was talking about, and I brought it up because you were talking about this person who was one of the first X-Files type investigator types. This movie, Unacknowledged, it's actually, I don't mean to change the whole interview around, but that movie's interesting because it talks about how black budgets work and how if JFK had ended up talking about these things, it kind of expose how they were laundering, or not laundering, but just pushing money under the table for this huge black budget that was funding all sorts of, there's 17 different intelligence agencies in the United States, and these machines that they were giving money to kind of off the books were funding these different organizations. And if JFK opened his mouth about it, or Marilyn, for God's sakes, opened her mouth about it, then everybody was afraid that they'd lose their money.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's 2 weeks before he was assassinated, we have letters from John Kennedy to the head of CIA, asking for any and all relevant UFO files, so that they could, because he didn't want the Russians to mistake a UFO for one of our vehicles and vice versa.
Oh yeah, watching it until World War III. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was kind of trying to, because he was talking to Khrushchev behind the scenes, and they were sharing information, they were working out deals, because JFK didn't really want to go to war. He was very much a peace-seeking kind of guy, and.
Well, he kind of had a transition there, though. I mean, he was more hawkish when he was
okay.
before he became president. The other thing that, I'm kind of, this isn't really totally fresh in my mind, but isn't there a story of Eisenhower, wanting to go see one of the bases that supposedly had the UFO in it, and they denied him access, and he said, look, I'll just send in the whatever army, and we'll just take over the base if you don't let me in there right now. And Eisenhower was pretty close to Kennedy, apparently. They got along pretty well together. So I don't know if anybody else remembers that story or not, or if maybe I'm just stitching my
nose. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, why not? Throw it out there. Why not?
Yeah.
And you're right. He was hawkish when he first came into office. He was thrown in relatively quickly, to the whole Bay of Pigs thing and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he had to make some very prudish decisions very quickly without much experience.
He came out of the meeting where they're showing him this Operation Paperclip, and he said, this is the best that humanity has to offer, or something like that. He's just totally disgusted that they were going to actually, stage a false flag as an excuse to invade Cuba. They were going to load up paint an airplane to look like a commercial jet, and supposedly have it full of students on spring break, and have it go down and blame it on Cuba for shooting it down as a reason to invade Cuba. And so when they told him this plan, he just said, no way. And that's when he decided to break up the CIA and fire his Joint Chiefs of Staff, general, the commander or whatever. And anyway.
Yeah, because those guys were wanting war wherever they could possibly get it in. They were talking about going to China, Vietnam. They wanted to invade Cuba. I mean, you name it. These guys his Joint Chiefs were just chomping at the bit to get into something.
Well, everybody in the Pentagon likes having, active wars going, because that's where they get their promotions. If they're involved in them, that's how they move up the ranks. If you're just sitting there and it's peacetime all over the place, well, then you guys are, they're not going to move up, and they aren't going to get the lucrative,
defense contracts. Yeah.
With like defense contractors and all that other stuff. So, that's, war is big business, and we've talked about this before. They've somehow managed to get military contractors in every congressional district in the United States. There's somebody making some part for the war in every congressional district in the United States. So it's about the only thing we do.
It's basically the only thing that's holding the U.S. economy together right now, aside from, the military. The bio stuff, the medical bio stuff. But back to the JFK stuff.
You mentioned the three tramps before, and that was the deathbed confession of E. Howard Hunt to his by his son St. John Hunt. That brought that information out, and he says that he was one of the three tramps, and it does kind of look like him. Do you have can you back that up, or is that just?
My opinion is that it's not him. Of course, very famously, Mark Lane, a very prominent and one of the first people to doubt the Warren Commission findings, actually was part of a lawsuit back in the 80s for, I think it was the Liberty Lobby on Spotlight magazine. E. Howard Hunt was suing him for defamation because they had said that he was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. And he won, but on appeal, he lost. I'm no photographic expert or anything like that, but when you put these things side by side, if you put a picture of E. Howard Hunt and a picture of the old tramp, and people say the tall tramp is Charles Harrelson, Woody Harrelson's father. People have been identified as these tramps. A lot of different people. Before, back in the late 80s, early 90s, a researcher came across the actual arrest reports for these three tramps. And they were actually identified. And they're not anybody famous. They're people you haven't heard of. There was even one guy interviewed, I think it was on Hard Copy. Harold Doyle was his name. Gus Abrams was another one. And I forget the last guy's name. But, they've been identified as all these different guys. But to my eyes, I don't see a match. And you can't just willy-nilly put these guys there without any, corroboration. But in my opinion, it's not anybody famous. They're just tramps that happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Can I ask a question now? What is the importance of the tramps?
Well, a lot of researchers put some credence to these guys because they had been identified in a book by A.J. Weberman back in I think it was sometime in the 70s. And they published these photos for the first time. And Jim Garrison actually showed them on the Johnny Carson show. It's just back in the late 60s. He's like, he showed a picture of the tramps. And he's like, you see these guys? These guys were arrested in Dealey Plaza because they were. But at the time, nobody knew who they were. And their pictures were published, and maybe somebody said, "Oh, that looks like E. Howard Hunt," and somebody ran with it, and it ends up in a book, and then it becomes part of the lore, and other people pick up on it and incorporate it in a story. Even Oliver Stone had the tramps as part of the story in his movie.
So they really had nothing to do with anything, in your estimation?
In my opinion, no.
Okay.
Well,
so.
The reason they're kind of interesting is people speculate that there are multiple teams of shooters stationed in I've seen one estimate of as many as 6 teams of like 3 shooters, a shooter, a spotter, and then somebody to kind of look out.
You must have been talking to Jim Fetzer, Rob.
Well, I think actually that was the everything from JFK to 9/11 is a rich man's hoax or something like that. But
yeah.
But even I probably got this mixed up, but this is probably Oliver Stone talking about this very subject in a way.
And he would have won it. And there would have been vaster changes in this country in 64, 68 than had ever been seen. And instead of the war, the deadening, gloomy war that Johnson brought us. And Nixon continued and continued like some weird-ass Macbeth into the dark nightmare of American soul, wherein we just suicide ourselves over and over and over.
That
Pros, always pros. You wouldn't use a bunch of amateurs to kill a president in an ambush, military ambush. Use the best you got. And these guys don't even, they're cells. They don't know what they're doing. They're doing their job. They're following orders. They may be protecting the president. They don't know what they're there for. Only perhaps at the end is the switch pulled. Maybe only the last shooter knows it's the president. There's a lot of strange ways to do a military operation. But believe me, it can be sealed really tight, very tight, into cells. 4 or 5 people, 3, 4 people in one cell, 3, 4, 5 cells. You can really do it tight.
And so that's kind of, you're not going to have CIA agents, FBI agents show up in Dallas all dressed, as they go to work every day and then, be part of the shooter team. They're going to wear somewhat disguises. And so that's why, E. Howard Hunt in his deathbed confession says that, no, he wasn't one of the shooters. He was just there as a bench warmer. He was there as the second string team in case the first team didn't make it. But, I'm not convinced on.
Go ahead. You're not convinced on what? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm not convinced that there's 6 teams, but I'm not convinced that Oswald did it either. It does look like the shot came from the front, not from the back, and so it could have been, just one expert, sniper, from the grassy knoll. But I don't even know if that's
grassy knoll. I told Rob before the show. The only thing that I really know about this from my childhood and anything, I wasn't born yet when this happened. My mother has an aunt. She's the youngest in that family. I think they have something like 13 kids in that family. She's the youngest, and she lived in Texas, and Kennedy was coming. She wanted to see him, and she went, and honest to God, until this woman died, my mother's aunt died, she said, the shots came from the grassy knoll. She was there. She swears by it, or if she was still alive, she would swear by it. She's dead now, but she always said the shots came from the grassy knoll.
Was she wearing a babushka that day?
She might have been. No, I don't think so. My mother said she always dressed very fancy. She said she's very fashionable. Because she's the youngest. She was the only female in that whole family of 13 boys, so She always dressed very fashionable. But they did come from a family of Czechoslovakian immigrants. So.
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many theories, over the years, and so many books written, and so many things put out there. That, things like what me and Chuck do is try to cut the fat away from what we can prove, which is a very, very hard task to clean up after 54 years of, stuff that is just noise. When you're actually trying to get to the truth of what happened that day. And, one of the things that always interested me a lot, is a guy by the name of Buell Frazier. He's the guy who gave Oswald a ride to work that day. Okay. He would know, if Oswald had brought a gun to work that day. This guy would know. He's still alive today. Okay. He's maintained over the years that Oswald had a package, but it was only 2 feet long. Okay. Which of course you can't fit a 3-foot gun in a 2-foot package. It just doesn't work. Not even broken down. It doesn't work. And what a lot of people don't know is that this guy, Buell Frazier, was actually arrested that day and charged with being an accessory to the murder of the president. Now, he wouldn't sign a confession, but he was 19 years old at the time, probably scared out of his mind. Are you going to admit, to bringing the assassin of the president and his gun, to work that day? I'm sure I wouldn't. I would have tried to distance myself as much as possible, and I don't begrudge the man for doing so. But there's been a lot of indications over the years that maybe Buell hasn't been telling the entire truth of things. And just for instance, during his HSCA interview in the late 70s, I found this little nugget, okay? And it says, Frazier says, No, I didn't know that he'd been caught, but I'll tell you this. I knew that he had the rifle. And Moriarty, the interviewer, says, Frazier said he did. And I said to myself, oh, my God, that was the first thing right there on the steps. I also knew that I didn't want to get pulled in. Now, that's very drastically different than what he told the Warren Commission. And, of course, his testimony wasn't included in the final report of the HSCA investigation. This is something that you actually have to go to the archives and listen to on audio tape, which a researcher by the name of Richard Gilbride did, and he transcribed it. And this little nugget came out of it, which means that if Frazier knew that Oswald brought a rifle to work that day, that changes the entire ballgame, because that's been one of the biggest questions, since that day, that people still argue about, did he have a rifle or not?
Well, he worked at a school book depository, so I imagine there's, lots and lots of nooks and crannies where a guy could bring in a rifle, a day, a week, a month ahead of time and just stash it, or bring it in parts on different days. But
and it's Texas too. I mean, come on, Texas back then, everybody just even today, people walk around with guns.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that you say that they wanted to charge him with accessory to the murder, which would make it a conspiracy, right? There'd be two or more people.
Right. Because this guy, Frazier, it was seen with Oswald at a gun range, that, according to Mrs. Slack, this is from Commission Exhibit 3077, Mr. Slack maintained that Oswald was at the rifle range on November 17, 1963, and that he had been brought there by a man named Frazier from Irving, Texas. So, and Frazier ended up having a rifle at his house that they confiscated. And actually, they gave him a lie detector test at the police station that night, Buell Frazier, and guess what? It's still classified. It's still classified, restricted by the Assassination Records Collection Act. So
that's going to come out in next year, or what, the Warren report?
No, that's going to come out hopefully this year.
This year, okay.
But why is it still classified after all these years? If he was telling the truth,
Fascinating.
Yeah, there's some truths that they just think we can't handle. We're just little children, and we'd have, nervous meltdowns. All the snowflakes would melt.
To tell you the truth, people, I think especially back then, I think they would have.
Well, if they knew the full scope of what really happened, maybe something would happen. I don't know. I think
see what would happen, Rob. They'd have to know the full scope of what the U.S. government was really doing. And maybe even not the U.S. government, maybe those black budget groups that are way deep, that they couldn't have that come out.
Yeah, well, the CIA was sponsoring a lot of these anti-Castro groups back then, to go take the fight to Castro, kind of clandestinely, And there's a guy by the name of Jefferson Morley. He was a Washington Post reporter. And he's actually been trying to sue them to release this guy named George Joannides, he was a CIA employee, his files, because he believes that this guy would have known something about Oswald, maybe even been controlling him, if that's even a thing. But he's been embroiled in a lawsuit for the past couple of years over these files. And George Joannides was a guy that the CIA brought out of retirement during the House Select Committee investigation to kind of determine what files were given to the House Select Committee. He was sort of a buffer, and he knew which ones should be sent through and which ones should be held back, because he was heavily involved in New Orleans in 1963 doing just these kind of things that he wasn't supposed to be doing inside the United States. But so very interesting stuff that's still going on to this day.
Well, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of, it gets more and more convoluted, because like you say, you have guys like, Fetzer, and the thing that really surprised me about Fetzer was, the 50th anniversary, all of the news media of the entire world is, converging on Dallas for for this event. And so what does Fetzer do? He holds an alternate event at the place where Jackie and John honeymooned. I thought, well, you're splitting up the people that are there that can, maybe talk to the press that's coming from around the world. So, why would you even do that? So, Fetzer does weird things like that, though. So, like I say, there are people in this movement that are trying to get people to not, concentrate on the more obvious things and, look at these wild stuff. So,
yeah, well, the 50th was an interesting anniversary in Dallas because the city kind of took over things in the plaza and made it like a restricted access, the advanced ticket only kind of posh event, for the Dallas elites and things of this nature. And of course, Alex Jones was there with his bullhorn and
did you see that he goes to the park and the city had constructed this giant bullhorn out of plywood? It looked like, and it's in the middle of this park where Alex is meeting him. Kind of go, how bizarre is that? What the heck's going on here? But
yeah, and the sixth floor museum there in Dallas, the old Texas School Book Depository building, is now a museum, and it's been a museum for 20, 30 years now. But it was always been run with a more lone nut, as Oswald did it, kind of leaning. They wouldn't, before they would never sell a conspiracy book in that museum. You just wouldn't hear anything about conspiracy at all. It was very much towed the company line that Oswald, did this kind of thing. But it seems like nowadays, they might be actually turning things around a little bit and coming around. When the curator Gary Mack died, I believe 2 years ago now, and people very much believe that he was, took that. He was a former conspiracy researcher. He was part of the team that found the Badge Man and in the Mormon photograph and things like this. But he came around, after he got the job, and he kind of changed his tune to a more Oswald did it kind of thing, and he kind of ran interference. But nowadays, it seems this is being run a little bit different, even with the city settling with Robert Groden and settling all these lawsuits, and so hopefully things are turning around.
Well, after time, people just kind of go, well, what difference does it make anyway? And I had kind of gotten to that point for a little while until 9/11 happened, and then I just said, oh, damn it. I can't make any excuses now. It's not like I'm in the fourth grade and can't do anything about it. So, and it does seem that we are, that no matter who they put in, there's this agenda that we're on. And, it keeps, we keep moving in the same direction, and it's not good. It's not, I thought I'd be living in the age of the Jetsons, but all that happened, when JFK got shot, and then Martin Luther King, and then Bobby, and, it's just like anybody that, stood up, and there have been, brave, lone souls that, that make a difference. The attorney William Pepper, represented the Kings and proved that, that it was, that Martin Luther King, was shot by a government conspiracy, basically. So these things do come forward, but what difference does it make? They don't really make it to the mainstream news. The people who are out here as independent researchers, look at it and we piece things together. It's kind of like Rachel said in her, what is the Shadow Citizen intro there, that we're out here and we're piecing all these events together. So you mentioned Chuck, and I think you meant Chuck Ocelli, who he's on right after us here, and so we're happy to be at the same place as him. And I've listened to him for years. He was a guest with Jack Blood numerous times, and
oh yeah.
And I had followed Jack Blood for a long time, so that's how I first heard about Rachel too. And we're doing this thing, so
that's right. That's right.
So, yeah, let's see. I got a clip about people like us, and this is another one I think that Oliver Stone. And I should have labeled these better, but here's another one.
To my office from all over the country, quarters, dimes, dollar bills from housewives, plumbers, car salesmen, teachers, invalids. These are people who cannot afford to send money but do. These are the ones who drive the cabs, who nurse in the hospitals, who see their kids go to Vietnam. Why? Because they care. Because they want to know the truth. Because they want the country back. Because it still belongs to us. As long as the people have the guts to fight for what they believe in. To my office.
It reminds me of Donald Trump. Take our country back.
But that, honestly, I think that's the best part of the whole movie is the court scene, when they're going through the whole court thing and how he acts, how he is able to emote all those emotions. And honest to God, every time I see that, I'm like, I start feeling like I want to cry. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? This is still going on.
Yeah. And in that movie, the point for me was the magic bullet thing. I mean, I just sat there and went, oh man, do they really think we're that stupid? And that scene, the magic bullet scene, and I don't know how accurate that is, if Garrison actually did that. But that was the one thing that I don't believe.
We can talk about that on the second, when we come back from our break, because we're going to have to take a break in a little bit. But when we come back from that, we'll talk about the magic bullet for real. Okay?
Okay, that sounds like
a good. But now in the meantime, here's the other thing. When you get back from the break, we're going to ask Rob Clark, our Lone Gunman podcast person, what he thinks really happened. And we're going to wait till the break's over to go over that, because this is a big thing. People, I go back and forth. I'm thinking, the government did it, obviously. Then I go, no, they didn't. And then I flip back and forth. And it'll be interesting to see what our expert thinks back in a little bit. But we have a couple more minutes. Did you have anything else, Rob, that you wanted to talk about this hour before they
just on the heels of the clip you just played, of Costner being Garrison, when Jim Garrison was doing his thing down there in New Orleans, I mean, he was the first person or the only person to ever bring charges against anybody in the assassination. And, I think Jim Garrison was, people have different opinions about the man, but personally, I think, he was a great American and did everything in his power to try to get to the truth of this thing.
Yeah, there are few like him. Most people get into that position and they, basically know, where what side where the butter comes from for the bagels. They just keep the local, power structure intact, and that's the other reason we call ourselves Shadow-Citizen is like Jack Blood always used to say, all laws are selectively enforced, and so it's the district attorneys that are deciding what cases they're going to bring and what they aren't going to bring. But they tried to keep him from getting reelected, and yet the people down there apparently loved him because they kept reelecting him.
Yeah, they even tried their damnedest down there to try to disrupt his investigation. They were sending guys down there to infiltrate his office, and they were stealing things and just all kinds of stuff. They were trying to set him up, for different, charges and things of this nature. And, he just wasn't having it. And it turns out that he ended up being right. This guy, Clay Shaw, was a CIA contract agent, not meaning that he was a official, CIA employee, but, they did use his information.
Right on. We'll talk about this after this break.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys because they have all the technology. They have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of micro plant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
Yo, what's up? Check this out. The voice of the revolution. American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
And when we're not invading some sovereign nation or setting it on fire from the air, which is more fun for our Nintendo pilots, then we're usually declaring war on something here at home. Did you ever notice that about us? We love to declare war on things here in America. Anything we don't like about ourselves, we declare war on it. We don't do anything about it. We just declare war on it. It's the only metaphor we have in our public discourse for solving problems, declaring war. We have to declare war on everything. We have a war on crime, the war on poverty, the war on litter, the war on cancer, the war on drugs. But you ever notice we got no war on homelessness? Huh? No war on homelessness. You know why? There's no money in that problem. No money to be made off of the homeless. If you could find a solution to homelessness where the corporate swine and the politicians could steal $2 million each, you'd see the streets of America begin to clear up pretty quick. I'll guarantee you that. I will guarantee you that.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio.
Hello and welcome, independent researchers, skeptics, and all of humankind, to Shadow-Citizen. Your hosts, Rachel L. McIntosh and Rob O'Sell.
All right. Thanks for hanging over that break, everyone. We're back for our second hour of Shadow Citizen. We're here on American Freedom Radio. And you can also hear us at www.shadowcitizen.online. And we're being broadcast all over the world right now. And people are very, very interested in the JFK conspiracy. Today we have Rob Clark from Lone Gunman podcast. He's like an expert independent researcher on this. And we've been kind of riffing about what we know about this. Rob, my co-host Rob, and I are very sketchy on this whole thing. And our guest, Rob Clark, he seems to know everything about this. And I told you guys before the break we were going to talk about the CIA contractors Rob was starting to talk about. So Rob Clark, take it from there. You had started talking about the CIA contractors and this whole JFK assassination.
Well, I think we were talking about the Garrison thing. They had guys, not official CIA, so to speak, but they were sending people down there to disrupt him. And I think, he ended up being right about Clay Shaw. Of course, this was after Clay Shaw died. A lot of his witnesses were dying, David Ferrie being one of them. And that's all in the JFK movie, of course. But Jim Garrison lived his whole life, believing in a conspiracy, and he actually got to see the movie after it was made, and he died shortly thereafter.
What do you think of the movie? Do you know?
I think it was very well done. I love Oliver Stone as a director, of course, in great movies like The Doors and Born on the 4th of July and things like that, just great movies.
He was kind of explaining how that JFK is his Godfather 1 and Nixon is his Godfather 2.
Yeah, for sure.
And about Garrison, I mean, what an amount of courage, because he lost his wife. The first wife just couldn't put up with all the stuff in that, and in this director's cut version that didn't go out to the theatrical release, they had a section in there where Garrison was also on the Johnny Carson show, on the Tonight Show. Yep. And he was, they put him up there, to make him look like a buffoon, and yet he was smart enough to turn the whole thing around. And, and I wish I would have clipped that one out because, it was actually a real good scene. And,
Johnny Carson was being a real a-hole to him, and he managed to turn it around.
Yeah, he did. It was an amazing, the guy was truly, Oliver Stone says he made some mistakes. He should have, arrested. Was it Perry, the guy that Joe Pesci played? And then
David Ferrie, yeah.
And then Guy Bannister, he should have arrested those people right away and got them in protective custody under arrest. And because he would have had a good case with those two, with the evidence that he had. So,
well, he actually had Ferrie in protective custody a few days before he died. Ferrie came to him, and his investigators put him up in a hotel. One of his investigators was staying there with him, and they couldn't keep him there. He decided, he couldn't be holed up like this anymore, and because it had been a couple of days, and he wanted to get out of there. And sure enough, a couple of days after he left protective custody, he ends up dead.
How did he die? Bullet?
No, supposedly natural causes.
Right.
They said natural causes, but the guy was hypertensive and he had
much medication.
Yeah, this medication that if he had taken too much of it, he could have died, and it would have still looked like natural causes. So.
But yeah, he was laying in bed. There's photos out there, kind of creepy photos actually, but there's photos of him out there. And Guy Bannister, the guy we were talking about, he actually ended up dead.
How'd he die?
Supposedly a heart attack.
A
couple months into 1964. So he didn't last too much longer than, this all took place. Just when the Warren Commission was getting to rolling, and they didn't even get a chance to interview him. He was dead before then. So, and all of his files most of his files ended up disappearing consequently. Very interesting, and I believe it was his wife. There's some consternation about exactly how he died, whether it was a heart attack or whether he was shot.
Well, how did they get that confused?
Well, there wasn't big fanfare. There wasn't any big write-ups about it back then. We don't have autopsy reports, things like that. So, and his mistress actually worked at his office, a lady by the name of Delphine Roberts. He was kind of seeing her on the side. And she had come forward and said that, that Oswald had been in the office and that he was working for Guy Bannister and things like this. But, it's just, this whole story it's crazy at every turn. You can go down all these rabbit holes.
Right. Speaking of mistresses, didn't Oswald have a mistress?
Well, that's up for debate.
Okay.
There is a lady out there who claims to have been his mistress, but
Judith Berry Baker?
Judith Berry Baker, yes, but there is zero evidence of anything she's being able to back up anything she says, which is a problem.
Yeah.
Well, how about the tie-in to the Dr. Mary's monkeys? The two stories seem to fit together rather well, but I'm not the kind of researcher that you are, and I've just heard them interviewed, and like I say, that does.
Rob O'Sell, is that Mary's monkeys thing? Is that the cancer research lady?
Yeah.
Yes. And then this Judith Berry Baker apparently got a scholarship to Tulane because she had, given mice cancer when she was a high school science project or something like that.
Okay, so everybody was involved with cancer that was involved with Oswald?
Well, the backstory is they wanted to figure out some way to assassinate Fidel Castro by giving him cancer. And, whether that's true or not, there was a lot of weird things going on.
Right. And of course, Jack Ruby died of cancer.
Yeah, right. And there are a lot of people that are kind of picking up fast-acting cancer when they might be, trouble to the establishment. So apparently, maybe there is something out there. Maybe they have managed to weaponize cancer. I don't know.
I like how the Cancer Research Institute down in Cuba, it's called Roswell.
Is it really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yep.
Now they're moving all of our most heavy, biolabs, the most, deepest, worst biolabs. What was the name of the island where they used to do all that stuff? And now they're moving those facilities inland. So that makes a lot of sense.
Right over here off of right off Connecticut in New York, right?
Plum Island, or is that it?
Yeah, Plum, and that's where Donald Trump was going to do a new neighborhood.
There.
No, he was going to start a new neighborhood. It was going to be a development. But there was obviously a huge nightmare in terms of cleanup because it was an environmental mess.
Oh yeah, that's we're kind of getting off the topic, and so But yeah.
But nonetheless, back to cancer and the cancer ladies, the mistresses. And so Oswald, he was with other women or no?
We have no proof.
Okay. So he had a wife and a kid. Was the kid a boy or a girl?
He actually had 2 kids, both girls. Yeah.
Girls? And has anybody followed up on them?
Yeah, actually, I did a show about him a couple years ago. June, who is the oldest daughter, was born in Russia, and she was about 3 years old at the time of the assassination, and his daughter, Rachel, had been born a month before the assassination, which, kind of puts in a doubt in people's minds is, okay, this guy's married, he has kids, he just had a baby, and now he's going to go shoot the president. It just doesn't compute,
Unless he was going to get a ton of money.
Yeah, but you got to weigh the odds of getting away with it.
I got to make money. I got kids to take care of. So maybe he got off with a ton of money.
I'm with Rob on this one.
Yeah, you can't perch yourself in a sixth floor building and think you're going to get away with it, and in front of hundreds and hundreds of people in the Secret Service. That's got to be.
Was he really there? Was he really there?
Well, that's another question. Here recently, some research has come about, and it's called the Prayer Man. I don't know if you guys have heard of this yet.
No.
No,
neither. No.
Okay. Well, if you Google Prayer Man and Lee Oswald or Prayer Man in the Texas School Book Depository, you'll see people have analyzed some of the films and photos from that day, and there is a figure in the doorway of the School Book Depository that's kind of blurry, but nonetheless is unaccounted for. As far as people who we know were in that doorway at the time of the shots. Now, this was right after the shots had rang out. And it sure looks a lot like Lee Harvey Oswald. Of course, you don't have a clear picture of his face. You have just kind of you almost have to see it. It almost looks like an ethereal being. But it's kind of in the shadows of the doorway. And this person is unaccounted for, and people think that, since he was up that high on the steps, that he had to come out from the inside of the building. Like nobody just walking by would perch themselves back in that doorway like that, because they would have had to go through about 15 or 20 other people that are standing on the stairs, most of which, if not all, were employees of that building. And of course, if these researchers can prove that this is Lee Harvey Oswald, then he couldn't have been on the 6th floor shooting, which would be a huge win, for the research community. But as it is now, it's just too blurry to make a definitive call on it.
Don't the shirts also match? And he had kind of a unique shirt on that day, and that that also the fabric and the cut of the shirt also seem to match, but.
I think, Rob, you're getting confused. There was a different Oswald in the doorway kind of thing. If you look at the Alchin 6 photograph, it's a very famous photograph of the assassination taken from the other side of the grassy knoll across the street, kind of looking back at the School Book Depository.
And you see the limos in the photo?
Yeah, you see the limos in the photo, and you can see the doorway in the background. And there's a figure standing there that a lot of the early researchers thought might have been Lee Oswald standing there. It turns out it was another worker named Billy Lovelady, actually. But some of Jim Fetzer's buddies, a guy by the name of Ralph Sinkay and Richard Hook, and even Jim Fetzer buys into this, that's really Lee Harvey Oswald, and there was some photoshopping going on in this photo and all this other nonsense, but that they can't prove. But so there's kind of two different Oswald and doorway kind of phenomenons here. But Prayer Man is the one that I think has a little bit more leg to it. I've had a researcher
and where
from Britain.
Where can we see that? You told us where to see that. Where can we see that picture?
If you just Google Prayer Man,
okay,
and JFK or Prayer Man and Oswald. Yeah, the Google images should pop up.
Okay. Thanks. Huh. Okay.
Another thing that kind of, I started the show with that, why was Kennedy killed, who benefited, and who could cover it up. And so another thing that kind of that Stone brought out is just that, all the protocols that the people that were supposed to be guarding the president didn't follow that day. So here's another clip.
Black Ops.
Not one valid attempt to secure the president's life, especially with a very sloppy thing that happened in Miami where he was almost hit on before, he'd been traveling through these areas, and he was a target for a while. I think there was no question he was a target at least through November, maybe into October.
I thought I had a different one there, too, that, talked about, all the windows that were left open, how the people, that should have been riding on the back bumper of the limousine, weren't. There was no bubble over the limo, no bulletproof bubble top on,
Did they do that back then? Have bulletproof bubble things?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
They had like Pope mobiles for the president? I don't think they did.
Yeah, it was a clear, I don't know if it was bulletproof necessarily, but it probably would have provided some obstruction.
And not to mention the bumpers are actually, set up, so that you can, two people can stand on it, or maybe, well, at least two, maybe three. And then they even have handles on the top of the trunk where you could, so you're standing on the bumper holding onto this handle, which would have, obstructed a clear shot from the back, like, Oswald was supposed to have made. So, and there's the video of the, going around the corner and those guards being waved off. There are so many weird things on there, and I think another very interesting and very tragic character in this whole thing was Jackie's personal bodyguard. Is that Clint Hill?
Yeah, Clint Hill. Yep.
And
the only one to actually move, and he's the one that made it to the limousine and kind of pushed Jackie back down into it.
And apparently he said he looked at the president and saw the back of his head blown out, and he looked over and gave the thumbs down to to the other people. But yeah, Jackie had crawled out on the back of the limo. This sounds really gory, but she went, they thought she was trying to escape, but she turned around and grabbed a chunk of his brain. And
that always blows my mind. That woman had that sort of wherewithal to do that.
And then in the emergency room, she actually handed that piece of brain to the surgeon and said, "Will this help?"
Yeah.
You're just in total shock,
Yeah.
Her life just completely changed. And another interesting kind of take on the big state approach, that it could only be carried out by a big state is, Jackie would have had the same presidential protection the rest of her life if she wanted it. But she turned it down. She said, "You couldn't protect my husband. Why would I think that you could protect me?" And then she married this Aristotle Onassis.
That's right.
Enough to protect her.
That's right. Well, I live in Rhode Island, right by Newport, where they got married and, all that. So she's like a princess here. She really is. I mean, for the rest of the country, I'm sure too, but for Rhode Island and Newport especially, she's, and the whole Kennedy thing is a huge deal here in Rhode Island.
I'm going to throw out one more here that I haven't ever heard anybody else bring up. I think I asked Jim Mars about it once I called in, and I said, because Clint Hill told the story of being at the open casket with Jackie, and Jackie looks in at John and says, "Clint, would you go get me a scissors?" And so she actually nipped off a chunk of his hair. And I'm wondering, as much as this woman was fashion sense and everything, they said that they had done some sort of when the body, between the time it left Dallas and before it got back to D.C. for the autopsy, they had done reconstructed surgery to the back of the head to make it, to repair that large gaping wound. And did she see that this was not her husband's hair and actually clip off of a chunk of the false hair? And this is total speculation on my part, but I'll throw it out there.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen a lot of the autopsy, the genuine, for real autopsy photos from his autopsy. I think Robert Groden, who was one of the photographic analysts for the HSCA, said that there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 and some autopsy photographs, of which we may have seen 10 to 15 of. Ever. And, there was allegedly, moving picture movie taken of the autopsy nobody's ever seen. I know which allegations you're talking about. I think that David Lifton alleged that in Best Evidence back in the 80s, of alteration, on the plane in between here and there, Parkland and Bethesda. Here recently,
well, there's a story, and I can't remember if this is from the men who shot Kennedy or where it was, but of this guy who was just a very gifted mortician that was called into service to, apparently do some reconstruction on Kennedy before he, and then he had, after he was done with what he had to do, then he just gets in the car and starts driving to Mexico, and then finally turned around when he heard it was all clear or something. But I'm not as, I don't remember my facts as well as a lot of people, like you and Chuck Uccelli, but I cover a lot of different things. So
yeah, the medical evidence is a whole different rabbit hole. It's a lot of it is above my pay grade.
Yeah. What do you think of the stuff about the mortician with Lee Harvey Oswald, actually putting his handprints on the Mannlicher Carcana, Oswald's dead, and they had to put the fingerprints on the rifle for him. Do you see any? Was that true, or have you heard of that, or is that?
I've heard of it. I don't think it was true, because initially the Dallas police didn't find any fingerprints on the rifle. It was only after it was sent to the FBI, where the rifle was dismantled, did they find a partial palm print, I believe, on the dismantled barrel, which could have been put there anytime, really. If I had the gun apart and was cleaning it, doesn't mean he shot it that day. They did give him nitrite tests the day to see if he had fired a gun, and they came back negative on his cheek and his hands. The whole mortician story, it's hard to say. You get so many stories related to the assassination from so many people who want to attach themselves to it in some form or fashion, but none of it can be corroborated, really. So I don't put much stock in stories that can't be corroborated.
Right. Rob Clark, here's my question to you. When you look through stuff, how do you know what you're looking at is good information?
I try to corroborate it as much as possible. When it comes to witness testimony, you want to contrast and compare it to, like, say, for instance, if you have a Texas school book and depository worker, who gave an affidavit that day, shortly after the assassination. You want to compare and contrast that affidavit with maybe what they told the Warren Commission, and versus what they told the Garrison investigation, versus what they told the HSCA. And, kind of compare and contrast all their testimony. And even then you need to compare and contrast that to their coworkers. What did they say? What did they see that day? How did they perceive how things happened that day? How did they perceive Lee Harvey Oswald? How did these guys interact together? And it's kind of like a gigantic puzzle with all these puzzle pieces that you kind of need to fit together and see what makes the most sense. Nothing's ever going to be exact. I mean, we're so far out now, and so many people are dead. so much noise and useless information has been put out there. It's going to be really, really hard to actually get to the truth of what happened. And the best thing we can do is speculate based on the best available evidence. You know, we can take declassified CIA documents, we can take FBI documents, and compare and contrast them to what we can prove. Because basically, my litmus test is, can we take this to court and use it in court? You know, hearsay, not so much.
Like my great aunt would be not called into court, right?
Right. I mean, she would be a good eyewitness if she was standing there and saw what happened happen. Yeah, I mean, but for your aunt to say 20 years later, you know, that she was approached by the FBI and they took her film and she actually took pictures that day, but none of this stuff can be corroborated. It's just a story.
Right.
You know, that part of it maybe not so much. But if we have a record of the police interviewing your aunt in Dealey Plaza, you know, right after it happened, or they drug her on the news like they did some people, and filmed an interview, then that's something tangible that we can use, you know.
So speaking of this grassy knoll, can you give us an overview, or me specifically, an overview of why that's important?
Yeah, I mean, it's important because
how it even fits in.
Yeah, well, it all goes back to the Zapruder film and the actions. You know, in the movie, he makes a big deal about saying that Kennedy goes back into the left. Okay. Now, when you're shooting a rifle, a high-powered rifle, you know, the bullet, when it hits the body, is going to transfer its motion of energy, you know, into that body as it passes through or impacts, and it's going to make the body move in a certain direction. You know, people have tried to explain this away by using the jet effect, things of this nature, but anybody that's ever shot a rifle, shot an animal, shot a deer, you know, you kind of see how things work.
We had Tony Zambotti on, and he did the math on the jet effect and disproved it and figured out that they tried several different pieces of you know, things, you know, I think they could only make it work if they used a watermelon, and he's talking about Tony really got into it. I mean, it was pretty wild, and he wrote a paper, peer-reviewed paper refuting the History Channel's jet effect. So I thought that was pretty good. So tell
people who he is. Tell people who Tony is.
He was a guest earlier. I forget what episode he was on, but he's with Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and so he also wrote you know, a paper, a peer-reviewed paper on why the buildings could not have collapsed the way they did, because there just was not enough energy, you know, available in the building to you know, to melt the steel, and you know, that would have caused the collapse that the official story tells. You know.
Yeah, Tony's just like a man that's like all full of mathematical statistics about stuff, and it was a very interesting interview.
Yeah, it was a great interview. Yeah.
But wait, so back to the left thing, and I want to hear what he was saying. So Tony disproved what? Go ahead. I want to hear what Rob Clark is talking about.
Well, it's jet effect is what they explained that the head was blown back because he was shot from the back, but because of the way the whatever it is, the velocity of the bullet traveling through the brain, and the brain is a different consistency of matter, and it causes a cavitation wave, and so that's
what would cause it to come back out the same hole that it went in.
Right, and so that's why they had.
I don't believe it.
No,
I don't either. And you know
what's Tony doing? He really thinks that's true?
No, he disproved it.
Thank God. Okay, good. Because then I can't believe anything he says.
Used the guy's own numbers and found out that he could only do it with a specific melon, and I think it even had to be a certain ripeness or something. You know, it was pretty incredible. But anyway, this is something that I've kind of had to play with over the years, because I heard, it was like an expert witness at a county commissioner meeting, and it was something totally irrelevant, but he said plausible deniability. And so this is something that, any defense attorney, tries to come up with, plausible, that, well, you can allege that, but until you can back it up with cold, hard facts, it's just not going to fly. And I think we have to kind of get away from that, because, I don't want to, lynch everybody that's anything is accused of. I think they deserve a fair trial, but I think once again, it's kind of back to this, it's to follow the money, or why was Kennedy killed, who benefited, and who had the power to cover it up. That's why I think that's such an important thing.
It is important, Rob O'Sell, but I wanted to hear Rob Clark talk about this back and to the left thing.
Okay, so the back and to the left thing, if you watch the Zapruder film, it makes an impression on you that, that this guy was shot from the front. Now, when you look at an overview of Dealey Plaza and Elm Street as it goes past the school book depository, it kind of curves to the left and then back around to the right a little bit. There's a little bit of a curve in Elm Street there. And there is a little grassy knoll area up on the side that had a wooden fence coming from the corner of the overpass where the train tracks went over top of the triple freeway there. The wooden fence came almost all the way down to the pergola area and then went back towards the parking lot. Back behind the wooden fenced area was a parking lot. This is where the train yard was, and just an empty parking lot that I believe the Dallas County Sheriffs had leased, to use to park. But it's alleged that, there's been a couple different people who say that they saw movement behind the fence at the time of the assassination. A couple different people say that. A lot of the witnesses in Dealey Plaza say that they felt that the shots came from behind them, towards the grassy knoll area, just like your aunt, I think, had that impression. Mm-hmm. Dealey Plaza is a very tricky place. The way that it's acoustically set up is very almost unique. If Oswald had been shooting from the 6th floor of the school book depository, there's a line of buildings directly behind him that the sound would have bounced off of and then back out into the plaza. It's kind of very hard to determine actually, where these shots were coming from. People standing directly underneath of the window, on the street, Elm Street, had no idea where these shots were coming from. Nobody actually saw Oswald in that window taking a shot. I think there was one guy who said he saw something up there, a movement, maybe a gun barrel, but couldn't actually describe accurately who he saw. And the floor right below that, there was 3 black guys that were kind of hanging out the window watching, the motorcade. Mm-hmm. Of course, they got the distinct impression that shots were being fired from above them. But then you get into the whole time thing. Did Oswald have time to run all the way across the building, stash the rifle, get down to the 2nd floor where he was supposedly encountered by the cop rushing into the building, and then get out of there and have time to get home and all this other stuff? I mean, it really does. If you look into this stuff, it's going to take some serious time to really, really take everything in.
Another thing was just, everybody saying how all of the cops who would be, who would know about the acoustics of the shot, they all ran up the hill toward the grassy knoll. And then there's the deaf and dumb guy who he couldn't hear anything, and he was sitting on one of the overpasses, and yet he looked over and he said what he thought at first was someone exhaling cigarette or cigar smoke, but then he saw the gun, and the guy hand the rifle to somebody in a railroad worker's uniform or outfit or whatever, and then that guy put the gun into a big toolbox and then put it, and headed toward, I don't know, one of the trains or something. But yeah, it was, he saw at least 2 people, if not 3. And,
wait, the guy's deaf and dumb?
He can't speak. He's speaking in sign language and he's telling the whole story. So he can't hear the shots. But
where did he think they were coming from? From his perspective?
No. Yeah.
I'm telling you, the grassy knoll.
Well, there was another guy named Lee Bowers who was actually in the control tower back in that parking lot behind the fence, and he worked for the train company, and he had he was probably maybe 2 stories up in this little train tower, and so he had a good view of what was going on in front of him, which would have been in a parking lot and then the backside of the grassy knoll. And, he stated to Mark Lane, that he saw some activity back there. He couldn't really, determine what was going on, but, he's seen people back there walking around. And it kind of matched Ed Hoffman. That's the guy's name, the mute guy, who couldn't really get across his point to the Dallas police, back at the time, cause he couldn't speak and he couldn't hear. So he had a really tough time getting his point across of what he was trying to say that he saw. And, this whole thing from the get-go was kind of botched by the Dallas police and their investigation. I mean, how do you let the killer of the president be murdered in your basement of the, it's just, they botched it from the word go.
On national TV, no less, right?
Yeah. I mean, they botched everything. That's why, the FBI stepped in relatively quickly and kind of took things over. But by the time the FBI stepped in, it was pretty much a done deal from the way they investigated or started investigating, the murder from, what Oswald was doing, where he was living, his possessions, the rifle, the depository, and all this stuff, and the chain of custody from the shells to the gun. And it's just botched from top to bottom.
Well, the other thing, when they picked up Oswald at the theater, somebody comes in and points him out, and then the police all run in, and the first thing he just starts yelling out, "I'm not resisting arrest. I'm not resisting arrest." Because and then on the way to the police station, he said, "I'm a patsy." I think he said it twice, but. The interesting point that I think my former governor made here in Minnesota, Ventura, said, the president has just been shot. It's an hour later, and the police dispatcher gets a message that some guy has just walked into the side door of the theater without purchasing a ticket. That's all that the dispatcher knew, and yet they sent out 12 cars with 24 policemen and a news crew to film them taking Oswald out of the theater. So I don't know if that's Ventura sensationalizing like he does a lot of stuff.
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, there had just been a cop killed not too long before that, and they were chasing this guy, and on his way to the theater, I guess, he kind of took a little pit stop in the alcove of a shoe store, kind of acting shady, kind of, looking around, probably breathing heavy, and then, kind of takes off again. And this guy, Johnny Brewer, who worked in the shoe store, he had heard about the assassination and, this cop that had been killed, and it's a suspicious activity. So he called it in and said, it might be the guy you're looking for. And, 100 cops show up to arrest one guy. It's crazy.
It just happens to be the guy that so when was it put together technically on this timeline? When was it established that it had been Lee Harvey Oswald that they were actually looking for that killed the president? Or did they already arrest him and they weren't sure, or did they arrest him because of this?
He was arrested because of the Tippit murder, the murder of the policeman.
he wasn't
officially charged with the murder of the president until I think it was almost midnight, because they had that midnight press conference, and a reporter actually told him, well, you have been charged with the murder of the president. And you see his face kind of like, oh no, kind of just, you can see it in his face. Like he just can't believe it. And then he's kind of let off. But he was initially arrested for the murder of J.D. Tippit, who was a police officer there in Dallas. And, it was relatively quickly that it established that this guy had worked in the building that the shots allegedly came from. So then they started putting two and two together and questioning him and all these other people. And then they formally charged him that night.
All right. So Rob, I'm just going to ask you, do you think he shot him?
I have a hard time with this one. I go back and forth. I'm originally a more conspiracy theorist, I guess you would call me, leaning kind of guy. I'm very distrustful of our government in general and, things of this nature, not just with this particular assassination. Because as you see in the 60s, it kind of follows a pattern with RFK and MLK and Malcolm X and things like this. But I go back and forth. It's hard to say. You think, there's no way this guy could have been up there doing this. Why would he do it? He had a wife and kids. Was he working for the CIA? Was he working for the FBI? Was he an informant? Or was he, what was he doing? It's very, very hard to put together and be 100% sure about it. Even if he did bring a gun to work that day, even if he was on the 6th floor, even if he was shooting, maybe he was told to do that, but miss on purpose to kind of pin it on a Castro-loving communist. Because in New Orleans, the summer before, the assassination, when Oswald was living in New Orleans, he had created this false identity, a guy by the name of Alec Heidel, who was supposedly, part of this Fair Play for Cuba committee. It was the name that the guns were ordered under. Okay, he didn't put Lee Oswald on the order slip for the gun. It was this other guy, A.J. Heidel, a fake name. Okay. So he was kind of building, with this fake name and this Castro supporting kind of aura about this guy. Could it have been just could somebody have told Oswald, look, we're going to create this maniacal Castro-loving guy who's going to take a shot at Kennedy. Kennedy's going to be scared into taking action against Cuba and the Russians because they think that, he's going to think that they tried to take him out. So maybe Oswald was up there. That was his impression, that he was supposed to shoot and miss, while somebody from the grassy knoll actually popped him. Then panic ensues.
Was Lee Oswald, was he mentally fit? I mean, was he a crazy person? Did he have any, aside from just doing all this weird stuff of like going to Russia, coming back and all this stuff, did he have any sort of psychological problems that people are, because maybe he was, I don't know, anybody look at his profile like that?
Yeah, they looked at it a lot for the Warren Commission. They tried to portray him as somebody that grew up without a father. His mother was very overbearing and not really too loving, I guess you would say. She was always an opportunist. He was in an orphanage for a while, but all in all, people try to say, he was this loner. He was this lone nut guy all by himself, but he always had friends. He had friends growing up in New Orleans. He had friends at school. He had friends in the Marine Corps. He had friends when he was in Russia. The problem is when he comes back from Russia, the friends kind of start going by the wayside. He starts hanging out with these weird people, these white Russians, like people like George Nomoranshield and the Paynes. I believe he probably befriended Buell Frazier. Because I believe Frazier gave him a ride more often than just, when he went to Irving. So he wasn't a real crazy person. I mean, he had a wife and kids. He had a job. He wasn't some schizophrenic, maniacal, freakazoid. You can go watch on YouTube an interview with him that he did in New Orleans. It's on television. He did it on the radio as well, where he's speaking very eloquently about, Cuban politics and policy. Crazy people don't do that.
Yeah.
Another kind of interesting aside is his De Mohrenschildt that he befriended, who was actually also a friend of Poppy Bush, and apparently at one time he wrote Poppy a letter saying, something about how he kind of screwed up and, said too much, and he woke up dead. He apparently committed suicide with a shotgun, and up until that point, he always hated guns. So this is a story from the Russ Baker Family of Secrets, I believe, is where I got that one. But yeah, he was kind of, so yeah, like I said, there's all of these things that just kind of don't add up more than pointing to the guy. It's more like it does just seem like a deep state type of thing that happened. I was going to ask you about Fletcher Prouty. He was sent to the South Pole or something like that and was laid over in New Zealand, and he picks up the newspaper, and it already has a profile of Oswald for the day, and their newspaper, they're in a time zone that's like 6 hours ahead of us. And so he's going, well, this, how in the heck would they have that story, that fast? And,
well, they did have the wire back then. It wasn't like they had to mail it to him or anything.
Right.
We weren't in the Stone Age quite yet back then. I mean, Fletcher Prouty said a lot without really saying a lot. He was very mysterious about what he says, and kind of always left it up to, whoever was asking him questions or interviewing him, to kind of determine things. He really didn't come out and say a whole lot. He was, of course, the basis for the character Mr. X in the JFK movie. It was kind of a combination of a couple people, mostly Fletcher Prouty. He tried to put this other general, Edward Lansdale, in Dealey Plaza, kind of walking past the tramps. He's captured in some of the photos down there, but we have no facial photograph of the man. It's just, well, that looks like his gait, and he has a ring on his finger, so it must be Ed Lansdale, which, of course, I can't put, stock into unless we can prove that it was Ed Lansdale, not just what kind of looks like him. This guy who was in charge of, the Project Phoenix in Vietnam.
Well, how about the alleged Texas oil man that they're saying was probably George Bush that got arrested in Dallas? Anything on that, or is that another?
That's another
wild speculation.
Wild speculation. I got a photograph of an older gentleman actually getting arrested that nobody's really identified, and probably is the oil man that they speak of. And there's another photo that people say is George Bush in Dealey Plaza, kind of leaning up against the Texas School Book Depository. And it was taken by a photographer for one of the newspapers down there, and he took a lot of photos that day. And if you actually take the time to go and look at his entire photo set instead of just this one photo from one angle, you can clearly see that this guy is not George Bush. When you actually turn around and see his face instead of just his profile. So that's another kind of myth that's been put out there. That's been debunked.
Self-feeding, because Bush is like the only one who was of age at that time that didn't know where they were when JFK got assassinated. I don't remember. I don't know where I was.
Right. So. But, he was supposedly an oil man then. We have no proof at all. He was working for the CIA in 1963. There's no documentation whatsoever about that we have seen yet. So
maybe that'll come out in the release later this year. So that would be.
I'm going to totally change this up a little bit. Rob Clark, your life has been consumed by this whole event. I have a question. It sounds like you've been researching this a lot, and you have pictures, and you have documents. how are you backing all this stuff up? I mean, you've got, your house must, or I don't know, maybe it's not. I can just picture kind of like just piles of documents everywhere. How do you store your stuff? How do you deal with all this information?
I have totes that are just full of books. I probably have hundreds of books on the assassination that have been written that I've read. Mm-hmm. I've read a lot online. I've got most of my documents online, uploaded to like Dropbox, various places, Drive, that I can access relatively quickly when needed. Mm-hmm. A lot of this stuff is stored on, in Facebook groups and in the archives on there.
Okay, good.
You just run across this stuff and just kind of tuck it away.
All right, good, because I just want you to be safe with this information, because God forbid your life's work all of a sudden gets, it's missing.
Yeah, I mean, I generally, when I'm looking into something, I kind of start with clean slate and see what I can dig up, and I might remember, oh my God, I think I might have a photo of this, and I'll go dig in and find it, or I'll think of a document that I saw and see if I can find it and pull it and kind of cross-reference things. It's not an exact science, believe me. Right. It's kind of more of a mess. But
and how many hours a day do you think you spend on this, or is like your brain always working on this?
It used to be. And in fact, I uploaded the very last episode of the Lone Gunman podcast this morning.
What do you mean the very last episode?
I'm not going to be doing it anymore.
Oh my gosh! Well, thank you for joining us for this momentous occasion. Thank you. I had no idea.
Yeah. I actually did it this morning.
Why?
It's been a long 3 years of doing it, and as you guys well know, all the fun stuff that goes into actually doing a show, and the logistics and the sound and the recording and this, that, and the other, the production, and it's not as easy as pushing a button and getting on here and talking for an hour or two. I have a life outside of the JFK research community, and it's just, every once in a while you look into something so hard for so long, you just need a break. And, I've taken a few breaks here and there, and, I've done 138 shows, for the Lone Gunman podcast, and I've covered a lot of stuff.
How can people get to your podcast? I want our listeners to be able to hear all the stuff that you've looked at. I want them to know what you've been working on. Tell them.
I mean, you can find it on iTunes. It should be up for, I don't know, however long that my archives are up. It's Spreaker. They should be up for, at least a couple more years.
It's just called Lone Gunman Podcast?
Yeah. I mean, just Google Lone Gunman Podcast and it should pop up. It's on Google Feedburner, so it should be accessible through any podcasting app that you have on your phone or however you listen to the shows. It's on Stitcher, it's on TuneIn Radio, it's on iTunes, it's all over the place. So just Google the Lone Gunman Podcast and you'll find it.
Wow. Yeah, somewhere. We will. I will. Okay, good. Now listen to me. When you take this break, right? You're taking a break from this. Will you come back when they have the Warren Commission papers released, or open the files?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm always going to be. I'm always going to be interested in the case. It's just this part of my life. I think I've done enough. I mean, it'd be one thing if, it was more a labor of love than anything, and it resulted just out of the fact and the necessity that I had all this stuff swimming around in my head, and nobody to talk to about it. At least in my real life.
Yeah, you had to create something.
So what better way to do it than, make my own platform and get some of this stuff off my chest and out of my head and discuss it with people and see what they got going on and, just open this whole thing up.
Yeah, it's almost like a creative process. Like when people say, like, I had to paint this picture, or I had to write this song. You had this thing, you had this JFK assassination thing. It affected you to such an extent that you had to create something, and it enriched your life, I would imagine, to a certain extent.
Oh, for sure. I've made so many friends.
Yeah.
And I've met so many interesting people from doing the show, and it's afforded me, the possibilities of, going to conferences and meeting people that I never would have met before in my life. It's been a totally great experience.
Yeah, look, I'm smiling. I wish you could see me. I'm smiling. I'm happy for you. This is awesome. And thank you so much for joining us, Rob. This is great. Now, you don't have any other things that you wanted to, a book or nothing. You just was right on this podcast. That was your thing.
Yeah, that was it. I mean,
that's it.
I could have sat here and wrote a book, but then, that takes too long. I'd much rather talk.
All right, thank you for being
with us. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And see you next week. We'll be with Susan Lindauer.
Shadow-Citizen with Rachel L. McIntosh and Rob O'Sell.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
Nutritious food is real body armor. It builds muscle, burns fat, improves digestion, and feeds the entire body the nutrients it needs. Did you know the U.S. government banned the hemp plant from growing in the United States and classified it as a Schedule I drug to hide it behind the marijuana plant? People have been confused about this plant for over 80 years, and many still don't know what hemp is. So now you know hemp is not marijuana, and marijuana is not hemp. They are different varieties of the same species. HempUSA.org wants the world to know these basic facts and to help people understand that hemp protein powder is the best kept health secret you need to know about. Remember, hemp protein powder contains 53% protein, is gluten-free, anti-inflammatory, non-GMO, and is loaded with nutrients. Call 888-910-4367, 888-910-4367, and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
Quality, value, style, service, selection, convenience, economy, savings, performance, experience, hospitality, low rates, friendly service, name brands, easy terms, affordable prices, money-back guarantee, free installation. Free admission, free appraisal, free alterations, free delivery, free estimates, free home trial, and free parking. No cash, no problem, no kidding. No fuss, no muss, no risk, no obligation, no red tape, no down payment, no entry fee, no hidden charges, no purchase necessary. No one will call on you. No payments or interest till September. But limited time only, though, so act now, order today, send no money, offer good while supplies last, 2 to a customer, each item sold separately, batteries not included, mileage may vary, all sales are final, allow 6 weeks for delivery, some items not available, some assembly required, some restrictions may apply. So come on in. Come on in. Come on in. Dang it. So come on in for a free demonstration and a free consultation with our friendly professional staff. Our experienced and knowledgeable sales representatives will help you make a selection that's just right for you and just right for your budget. And say, don't forget to pick up your free gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high-quality, premium, select, gourmet pocket pencil sharpener. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. And if you act now, we'll include an extra added free complimentary bonus gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high-quality, premium, select, gourmet, combination key ring, magnifying glass, and garden hose in a genuine imitation leather-style carrying case with authentic vinyl trim. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. Actually, it's our way of saying bend over just a little bit farther.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow, friendships to flourish, with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio and service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio.